Over 30 people arrested daily, detained for a Facebook post, imprisoned for a tweet. This isn't happening in an authoritarian regime. This is modern Europe. And now, the United States government has officially taken notice. Today, we're diving into one of the most controversial topics in transatlantic relations, the state of free speech in Europe. On December 5th, the Trump administration released its national security strategy, a 33-page document that sent shockwaves through European capitals. Among its many claims, the document directly accuses several European countries of censoring free speech and suppressing political opposition. Are European democracies truly restricting speech in ways that threaten fundamental freedoms? Or is this political grandstanding? In this video, we're going to examine the evidence, look at specific cases from the UK and Germany, and try to understand what's really happening on the ground. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about what the United States actually said and why it's such a big deal. The 2025 National Security Strategy isn't your typical policy document. While previous versions focus primarily on threats like China and Russia, this one dedicates substantial attention to criticizing America's oldest allies, European nations. It states that Europe faces the real and more stark prospect of civilizational erasure. Among the culprits it lists censorship of free speech and suppression of political opposition. The strategy goes further, suggesting that if current trends continue, the continent will be unrecognizable in 20 years or less. Now, this wasn't just buried in the document. This critique appears in a section titled Promoting European Greatness, which, depending on your perspective, is either tough love from an ally or extraordinary interference in internal affairs. This message was actually previewed earlier in the year. Vice President J.D. Vance delivered a speech at the Munich Security Conference in February 2025, where he made similar arguments. He essentially told European leaders that their gravest danger wasn't Russia or China, but their own government's policies on speech and migration. The European reaction was swift and negative. Antonio Costa, president of the European Council, stated, "What we cannot accept is this threat of interference in Europe's political life." German government spokesman Sebastian Hill rejected what he called partly critical comments, emphasizing that political freedoms, such as freedom of expression, are among the fundamental values of the EU. But here's where it gets complicated. The document doesn't just make vague accusations. One could say it's responding to something real, actual enforcement actions, arrests, and prosecutions happening across Europe. Whether you think these are justified responses to harmful content or dangerous overreach depends largely on where you draw the line between protection and censorship. So let's look at the specifics, starting with the most surprising case, the United Kingdom. The numbers coming out of the UK are genuinely striking, regardless of your perspective on the issue. According to parliamentary debates and freedom of information requests compiled by multiple UK outlets, British police are making more than 30 arrests per day for online communications. That's over 12,000 arrests annually under laws that criminalize messages deemed offensive, indecent, obscene, or menacing. Let me repeat that: 30 arrests per day. Every single day. These often rely on the Malicious Communications Act of 1988, along with Section 127 of the Communications Act 2003. These laws make it an offense to send messages that could cause annoyance, inconvenience, or anxiety, terms that critics argue are extraordinarily vague and open to interpretation. Parliamentary records show that these arrests have increased by 121% since 2017. Every police force in the country now has dedicated teams monitoring social media. A think tank estimated that investigating non-crime hate incidents alone has consumed over 660,000 hours of police time. Hours not spent investigating burglaries, violent crimes, or sexual offenses. Now, let's be clear about something important. Arrests don't equal convictions. In fact, the gap is enormous. In 2023, there were around 12,000 arrests, but only 1,119 convictions under these provisions. In 2024, only 137 people received immediate custodial sentences, most for less than 2 months. What this suggests is that police are casting an extremely wide net, but courts are being far more cautious about actual convictions. Still, being arrested, even without conviction, means detention, potential reputational damage, and psychological impact. Let me give you some concrete examples that made headlines. After the tragic Southport knife attack in summer 2024, which killed 3 young girls, British police arrested several people over social media posts. A 55-year-old woman was detained for spreading what police said was false information about the attacker's identity. Information they claimed was intended to stir up racial hatred. The misinformation contributed to nationwide unrest. 2 men received prison sentences for posts made during this period. One had called for mass deportation of migrants and urged people to set fire to a hotel housing asylum seekers. Another case involved an ex-Royal Marine who was arrested and held for 17 days for posting a video of himself speaking about illegal migration. He was acquitted by a jury in 17 minutes. Sir Stephen Watson, Chief Constable of Greater Manchester, publicly stated that the policy of investigating online speech is past its sell-by date. He argued that Manchester is safer when his officers chase violent criminals rather than what he called egregious tweeters. Even Manchester's Labour Mayor Andy Burnham supports this position, showing this isn't a simple left-right divide. The UK government's position is that these laws target illegal harassment, abuse, and threats, genuine harms that have simply moved from the physical to the digital space. Critics counter that the laws are so vague that they create a chilling effect, where people self-censor out of fear of arrest rather than because their speech is genuinely harmful. When 90% of all crime is going unsolved, as it was in 2023, and police resources are devoted to monitoring social media for potential offense. We could ask, have priorities become inverted? Now let's turn to Germany, which represents a different but equally controversial approach. Germany's story begins with the 2017 Network Enforcement Act, which is also called the NetzDG model. Unlike the UK's model of direct arrests, Germany created a system that essentially deputizes social media platforms to enforce German criminal law. Here is how it works. Social media platforms with more than 2 million users must investigate and remove content flagged as illegal. If the content is obviously illegal, removal must happen within 24 hours. Other illegal content must be removed within 7 days. Companies that fail face fines up to 50 million euros. What counts as illegal? 22 provisions of Germany's criminal code, ranging from incitement to violence and hate speech, to defamation and insults. The theory was that platforms weren't effectively self-policing according to their own community standards, let alone German law. So Germany decided to make non-compliance extraordinarily expensive. But here's the problem that emerged. When you threaten companies with 50 million euro fines and give them 24 hours to make decisions on complex legal questions, what do you think happens? A 2024 study examining content deletion in Germany found something interesting. In Germany, 99.7% of comments deleted from Facebook and 98.9% deleted from YouTube were actually legally permissible speech. These were not illegal posts. They were legal speech being removed because platforms, faced with massive financial penalties, chose to be excessively cautious. Think about that ratio. Basically, 100% of what's being removed is legal. Speech that happens to exist in a legal gray area or might be controversial. Germany has 16 dedicated online hate speech task forces across the country, investigating around 3,500 cases annually in some regions alone. One unit in Lower Saxony has successfully prosecuted about 750 hate speech cases over 4 years. In one example cited by prosecutors, someone posted that refugee children should play in electrical wires, a clearly hateful statement. The person was fined 3,750 euros. Is that the kind of speech that should face prosecution? It's vile, certainly. But is criminal prosecution the appropriate response, or does it set a precedent that sweeps up too much protected political speech? The European Union has now largely superseded NetzDG with the Digital Services Act, which came into full effect in February 2024. The DSA is meant to harmonize content moderation across all EU member states, but it carries many of the same structural problems. Platforms as enforcers, vague standards, and incentives to ward over removal. The European Commission has already launched DSA investigations against major platforms like X and TikTok for failing to remove illegal content quickly enough. Germany's model has been influential globally. Russia, Singapore, and the Philippines have all cited NetzDG as a positive example when proposing their own online speech regulations. That should give us pause. When more authoritarian regimes point to Western democracies for speech restrictions as justification for their own. Yale Law School's Media Freedom and Information Access Clinic summarize the problem. NetzDG incentivizes intermediaries to over-police speech, because companies are more likely to remove potentially problematic content than risk massive fines. Again, context matters. Germany has unique historical reasons for sensitivity to hate speech. The question isn't whether Germany's concerns are valid, but whether the enforcement mechanisms strike the right balance. The UK and Germany are just the most documented examples. Similar trends exist across Europe, though the specifics vary. France passed its own online hate speech law, commonly called the Loi Avia, before it was struck down as unconstitutional by France's Constitutional Council. Many European countries are now passing laws that broaden what counts as illegal online speech, pushing platforms to take down content. The European Digital Services Act now provides a framework, but the fundamental tensions remain. Who decides what speech crosses the line? How quickly must decisions be made? What happens to borderline cases? And critically, what happens to speech that's controversial or offensive, but not genuinely harmful? What we're seeing across Europe is a genuine philosophical divergence from the American free speech tradition. The European approach could be characterized as, speech can be restricted to protect dignity, prevent harm, and maintain social cohesion. The American First Amendment tradition is far more absolutist. Speech should rarely, if ever, face government restriction. They reflect different historical experiences and different value hierarchies. But what's undeniable is the practical reality: thousands of arrests, hundreds of thousands of content removals, and a demonstrable chilling effect on willingness to speak freely online. So, where does this leave us? The U.S. national security strategy's critique of European free speech policies isn't happening in a vacuum. The numbers are real. Over 12,000 arrests annually in the UK. Nearly 100% over-deletion rates in Germany, hundreds of prosecutions, and massive resource allocation to monitoring online speech. But the framing matters too. The Trump administration isn't making this argument from a neutral position. The document's language about civilizational erasure and its focus on migration alongside speech issues suggests this is part of a broader ideological project, not simply concern for civil liberties. European governments counter that they're addressing genuine harms: incitement to violence, coordinated harassment campaigns, hate speech that creates hostile environments for vulnerable groups, and the rapid spread of dangerous misinformation. These are real problems that require real solutions. The fundamental question is this: have European democracies gotten the balance right between protecting people from harmful speech and protecting the freedom to speak, even when that speech is offensive or controversial? From one perspective, these laws represent responsible governance, recognizing that digital spaces need rules, just like physical spaces, and that platforms have proven unwilling or unable to self-regulate effectively. From another perspective, these systems create Orwellian enforcement regimes where vague laws, massive fines, and overcautious platforms combine to suppress legitimate political discourse and create a culture of self-censorship. What's clear is that this won't be resolved quickly. What's your take? Are European governments right to enforce these restrictions? Or have they gone too far? If you found this analysis valuable, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.